Welcome viewers to the series Exploring Careers in Conflict Transformation. My name is Kate Bateman. I'm a junior at Middlebury College, and I would like to introduce this episode's guest speaker. I'm joined today by Kate Bateman, senior expert on Afghanistan for the United States Institute of Peace. Welcome, and thank you for joining us, Kate.
Thank you, Kate, as well. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Kate, this series explores a number of different professional roles in the field of conflict transformation. Tell us a little about the United States Institute of Peace and the work you do as it fits into this career space.
Sure, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity, and welcome to everyone listening. We were founded in 1984 as an institute, funded by Congress, and we were founded as a national, bipartisan, and independent institute that is dedicated to the mission of preventing, mitigating, and resolving violent conflict around the world. So as I said, we're funded by Congress, which makes us, unique. We are an NGO, we're non-governmental, but we are a line item in appropriations from Congress. And then we also receive some funding from the agencies directly from State Department, USAID, Defense Department, and others. We also have a field presence in around a dozen countries. Some of the most volatile in the world, like Sudan, which is engaged in trying to evacuate their people, or some of their people now. We were in Afghanistan until the collapse of the government in 2021, the previous government. And we're also we have a team in Iraq, at Bangkok, which handles regional, Colombia, which has worked on the peace process there, and several other countries around the world. And so what does our work, involve on a daily basis? We do a lot of research and analysis and advising policymakers in Washington and elsewhere. And we sometimes talking to allied governments, talking to other similar peace-building organizations or organizations dedicated to, related missions. We also, aside from that kind of research and analysis work, a big part of our work is more in terms of practice and engagement and convening. So we convene dialogues among civil society and governments, foreign governments, as well as ours. We hold mediation. We do mediation on in terms of active negotiation processes. We do training and education. We have a whole center, a couple centers dedicated to training around peace building work. And then I would also just highlight we're kind of unique in this role because we are federally funded, but we maintain the independence of, we're not part of the federal government. So it kind of allows us to play this facilitator role where people might, either foreign governments or civil society actors or even combatants might be able to speak to us in a situation where they cannot politically or physically or practically speak to the U.S. government, but they know we have a close relationship with U.S. government agencies, and we can sometimes play this kind of facilitator or a go-between role.
Just a tangent from that, are you ever, on the contrary, tainted by your connection to the U.S. government?
Yeah, it's a good question. It does, obviously in a conflict where we are a party to where the U.S. government, the United States is a party to the conflict, maybe the qualifier U.S. Institute of Peace might not be an advantage, right? So in that case, and in Afghanistan, that was obviously very true. So I did not work for USIP while we still had a presence in country. I joined just after the collapse of the government, of the Republic government. So I didn't see that firsthand, but it still affects us, in our work on Afghanistan today. So that's just become something to delicately balance, and we want to we obviously want to maintain our independence and our voice and analysis, but we have to recognize, we are seen as, in some ways, closer to the U.S. government than another independent NGO may be seen.
Yeah. And specifically talking about your role as a senior expert on Afghanistan, what does your work look like on a daily basis?
What my work looks like is really tracking developments in Afghanistan by staying in contact with our team's network of people on the ground, but doing that in a way that doesn't put them, does no harm, doesn't put them in a dangerous position. And it's really important to keep up this granular understanding of the situation, because eyes and ears in Afghanistan are so much fewer than they were two years ago. With the many media outlets have pulled out, a lot of international journalists have had to leave, Afghan journalists have had to leave, and embassies there are some Western embassies reopened, but a lot of embassies are closed. So just understanding of what's happening is very valuable to our U.S. government counterparts. And our big focus as a program is on women's rights, the humanitarian and economic crisis, Taliban governance and decision making, and some. I mean, we're not a counterterrorism organization, but we have some analysts who focus on CT. And then we also we're also still really partnering with Afghans in the diaspora and those in country to the extent we can, to try to maintain a spotlight on the crisis in Afghanistan, and to try to engage the diaspora communities in dialogue around the future of the state. There will hopefully be some post-Taliban future, and no matter whether that may be in 3 or 5 or 10 or more years, we hope that we can, the diaspora is quite divided, and we hope that we can play some role in kind of helping people in the really difficult situation they're in, trying to make a life outside, as refugees, but many of them want to stay. They're still committed to a different future for their country. So trying to convene dialogues around potentially, someday talking with the Taliban, potentially, like, if leavers emerge, how do we put pressure on the Taliban government to change its repressive policies.
Mm-hmm. And I was intending to ask later about what types of technology you use, and it seems to have come up here about how do you communicate with people that are in Afghanistan right now in a safe way?
Generally phone calls and some, encrypted like text services like Signal. I don't speak Dari or Pashto, the main local languages. So it's my colleague, mostly my Afghan American colleagues, who do most of the group like calls and some group sessions with women. We have a program where we're convening Afghan women and Islamic scholars from elsewhere in the world to actually put together like religious arguments for why the Taliban's vision of the role of women in society is not based on actually based on Islamic principles. But technology otherwise with the diaspora, it's often with Zoom sessions or just in person, good old-fashioned face-to-face.
And thank you. I saw on your Twitter that you retweeted an article about the psychological devastation that has already started happening to girls and young women who haven't been able to go to school. I think it's only fitting in an interview where we both go or have gone to Middlebury and are looking at the amazing things you've done in your career. How do you stay motivated working specifically on Afghanistan when these past few years have been really devastating?
the world needs to know what's happening there. So we see ourselves as part of a, we're not an advocacy organization, but we are a part of keeping Afghanistan on the radar for policymakers. And there really are there is a large group of American policymakers who've been, in my generation especially, who've like been formed by, their careers might have been formed by the US engagement in the country. So there are a lot of people who are still very, emotionally committed and passionate about it. And, I count myself among them. So it's just, a place I lived for 14 months, which isn't much in the grand scheme of things, but I have friends there and people I care about and don't want to, give up on.
And when you lived there, who were you working for then?
I was working for a State Department. And I was at the embassy in late 2010 to early 2012. So it was when we were during the troop surge, when we had under President Obama, and he had, after Bush did these kind of mini surges, Obama, added so many troops. We reached 100,000 US troops in country, with plus another 45,000 or so NATO troops. So that was the peak of our troop presence as far as international troop presence. So I was there with State.
And how much do you think your former deployment informs the work you do now in DC?
I mean, certainly not. That was going to be one of my, as far as advice to people, if you want to work in foreign affairs, your time spent living and working abroad is pretty fundamental to the, is critical to, especially to working on a region. And, of course, the more you learn about something in a place, a topic, or, the more you learn, usually, I think if you're smart, you appreciate you don't know, the more you know, the more you appreciate you don't know. And, so I think in that way, being abroad being there for 14, 15 months, when I was there and when I'd returned, I still don't feel, I still feel like I can hardly call myself an Afghanistan expert, but it's all relative. And you can, I know a little bit of Dari, not much Dari, but having had that time and just like the length of time I've been involved in policy on Afghanistan, okay, relative to a lot of people who might speak about Afghanistan, I can call myself an expert. But that time abroad, that time in country, if you're going to have a regional focus, is like really important, and the language ability is really critical too.
Would you really advise that people work abroad?
For some period, I mean, I think it's, yeah, absolutely. And of course, in terms of life path, and, if people, many people want to have a family or want to have kids, right? If you do want to have children, you have to to start, conceiving of when will you have the opportunity? Like, do you want to have a family abroad? Do you want to go to the Foreign Service? Like, those become really critical questions when you're, thinking of a career path. Because even the decision to, work in foreign affairs, I hadn't quite appreciated the extent to which it does limit you to pretty, relatively few geographic areas in the US where you can work, right? Or where there are the most career opportunities, in Washington, New York. And if you want to do Asia issues, like maybe, Indo-PACOM is in the military, the regional combatant command, Indo-PACOM is in Hawaii. San Francisco, Seattle have some, Asia focused work, but DC and maybe New York, are really the key. So, but back to the international travel and living abroad, I think 1 to 2 years is like, it's so formative, as an early professional or any time in your career.
This is all super interesting. Thank you. I'm curious about your experience. You mentioned grad school, from campus to career. I know you majored in English at Middlebury, which doesn't necessarily show the most obvious connection. I'd love to hear your story from campus.
Sure. So, right, I majored in English and minored in French, mainly by virtue of because I wanted to go abroad for junior year. I mean, going abroad was really important to me junior year. I knew I loved this like cross-cultural experience and understanding and being a student of a different culture and society, and then that challenge of like communication and relationships across those divides, I guess. So that was kind of my first exposure to to living abroad. But I came out of undergrad pretty unsure about what I wanted to do, and I did the English major partly because it made sense credit-wise, and partly because I knew just the critical thinking. I loved the English department. The critical thinking and the writing were, I thought, skills that I could transfer to almost anything I wanted to do. So after Middlebury, I had a couple internships with like an environmental and social change organization in Washington State. And then I also worked, before that, I worked for the Appalachian Mountain Club and just had fun in the White Mountains for a few months. But then I found myself in DC for an internship at an environmental organization, a nonprofit. And my two loves were like environmental studies and foreign affairs. And from that job, I was living on Capitol Hill in DC, where you're kind of by osmosis, like introduced to domestic politics in this intense like political scene. And I had friends working on the Hill and so on. So I literally met a woman who had a Vermont t-shirt on in the park, in Lincoln Park, where you might.
Whoa.
And she had a Vermont t-shirt on, and I stopped her, and she worked in Senator Jim Jeffords' office at the time. She was the chief of staff. And I said, I think maybe I had I'm from Maine. So it turned out she went to Bowdoin and I went to Middlebury, and we started talking. Yeah, she was like a decade or more older than me, but we got talking, and she introduced me to the chief of staff in my congressman's office at the time, from my home district, the Maine congressman's office. And I ended up getting a job there like a couple months later. So I started on the Hill, and they said, what do you really want to work on? And I said, please, I would love to work on environmental issues or foreign affairs. They said, well, we just hired someone for the environmental work, so you've got foreign policy. So that was literally like my first foreign policy related job. And then and the Hill is a great place to be an entry level, a junior professional, and exposure to this like wide breadth of issues, to the political process, the policy process, things, to the relationship among the agencies. And from there, I kind of, understood better State Department's roles and where could I see myself at state, or, what agencies. So then after working for 3 years on the Hill, I went to grad school for international relations here in DC, and then did a presidential management fellowship, a PMF, and those are 2 years. It's a 2-year program, you have to be straight out of graduate school. And it's wonderful because it's kind of a fast track into policy jobs. And there's a defined like pay scale they kind of work you through in those 2 years. And at the end, it's competitive. I mean, you compete for those jobs, but at the end of the 2 years, if you've had a good, if you're liked and done a good job, then they want to retain you, then it's quite easy to kind of convert into that agency. So that's what I did at State Department. And that's how I focused on South Asia in grad school. So was doing South Asia at State, and got the job in Afghanistan when we were sending a lot of civilians there. And then when we came back to the US, I got a job for an inspector general agency, actually, which is like a watchdog and oversight agency responsible for all US money going to reconstruction in Afghanistan. Because of my experience, because of my job in Kabul and experience on that file. And then unexpectedly, like I worked for that agency which was federal government for 5 years total. I did a Council on Foreign Relations fellowship during that time. And then from there came to USIP.
Wow. And how would you say now your job at USIP compares to the dozens of jobs it sounds like you've had since leaving Middlebury?
I guess the biggest difference is that, you know, we are non-governmental, so it's kind of my first extended time in, you know, outside the government for a while. So that's been refreshing, and like the independence I have, and I can speak and write more freely, like under my own name, and, you know, have more autonomy in what I study and work on, projects I'm involved in on our team. At the same time, it's, you know, being on the outside, you're a bit, you know, with that independence comes like the cost of not being at the forefront of you're not in the policymaking process. I mean, you're kind of in this unique advisory role. And another thing I like is that I have time to really dig into issues here and read. And when you're in a policy role, you often just don't have the time to read the 30-page report, very, very rarely. But in this role, we can like really grapple with the substance of the issues and be a resource of expertise for the people ultimately making decisions.
Given what you've learned from them, what advice would you give to Middlebury students who are hoping to start a career in national security?
I would say if you can travel, you know, abroad, or work abroad, living and working, not just traveling, you know, do it for sure. I think it's so important to like have that experience of it gives you more humility. Excuse me. It gives you a greater sense of like cultural humility by being exposed to, or having some length of time like living abroad. You can I hope most people would better see like how difficult it truly is to sometimes, you know, understand another culture and that country with its own, you know, unique history. And I think it's healthy to see how other parts of the world see us as a country, and that's important to have that perspective in any national security related job. But beyond that, just professionally and practically, you come back here as like a resource, as an interpreter, if you will, for other elements of, if you decide to go into government, or whether government or business, you come back with, you know, as a kind of interpreter and a bridge between those, among different countries, right? Or whether you're going into government, business, or civil society organizations, the nonprofit sector.
And I know you focus on Afghanistan, but USIP looks at the world. What countries do you think will be most crucial to have new experts in the next 5 to 10 years?
We became overly focused, I think, on the Middle East, the greater Middle East, in my years right out of school, right after 9/11, and my whole career was shaped by that event. It was only a year after I graduated, but now I think we'd be doing ourselves a disservice. Like, we as a country would be doing ourselves a disservice if we overinvested, right, in only, you know, Russia and China, thinking that we won't have, you know, we may well have another fragile state, a terrorist attack or whatever it may be, or maybe a proxy war that involves our strategic competitors but plays out in a country like Syria or Afghanistan. And even if we think we won't be sending large numbers of US troops to another country for a while, the track record of the last 100 years suggests that we may well do that we probably will do that again. So I think, if follow your passion and interests and your loves as far as like functional and regional expertise, and that's probably the best thing people can do, but keep their career opportunities open.
I know you have to go, so I'll ask just one last question. Middlebury has been given this gift of being able to better equip our students for the world that we're in right now and that you know a ton about of. What do you hope that students can get out of Middlebury to help prepare them for the kind of work that you do?
I would hope I'll use this term again, I would hope they develop a sense of cultural humility and respect for diversity and pluralism and other societies. I think to the extent the program can focus on case countries, I think historical knowledge is super important, and I wish I had taken more history at Middlebury. And language, of course. I hope that if it makes sense, maybe some of that funding can go towards language abilities. And then finally, maybe we need some more attention at the undergrad level to these practical skills of like mediation and facilitation, of dialogue.
Great. Well, Kate, thank you once again for your engagement with us and helping students to prepare for their first career destinations. It's been such a pleasure talking with you today.
As I wish you all the best, Kate, and to everyone listening, you have a lot of exciting things ahead, so congratulations.
This concludes this episode within the series Exploring Careers in Conflict Transformation. In closing, I want to encourage viewers to tune in to get career perspectives and advice from a number of professionals in a broad variety of organizations in other episodes in this series. I also want to encourage you to tune in to the other MIDDVantage series, which can be accessed through the Events and Programs tab on the CCI website. Thank you again for watching.